Welcome to the podcast Camina, conversations about migration in northern Arizona. This is Susan Cooper, and I'm here with Stephanie Voss.
Hi, Susan. Last time, we heard from two people who talked, amongst other things, about what it was like for them growing up speaking both Spanish and English. And I'm wondering how many people have had similar experiences as that, or if you haven't, if you wonder what it would be like. Susan had an opportunity to talk to somebody who can tell us more about that.
And I was really grateful for this interview, mainly because so many people in this country have grown up in bilingual homes, and there's definitely challenges. And what I was excited about is that Susan also had this experience, but she's also worked in the area of bilingual education, and so she was able to share with me her experiences of working with families. Well, welcome to Camina, Susan, and I'm so glad you're here.
I'm glad to be here.
Good. Well, Stephanie and I, one of the topics we really wanted to share was the whole idea of, as even a second and third generation immigrant, growing up in a home that is bilingual.
Yes.
And what that means. But I was especially excited to have you talk to us a little bit about that, because it's not only your personal experience, but you've worked in the area with children. Good. First of all, we grew up in the same area.
Yes, we did.
You grew up really, 10, 15 miles away probably from me.
Yes.
You grew up in Pasadena.
Yes.
And it was a bilingual home.
Mm-hmm. It was. Not necessarily a bilingual community where I grew up. And there was Spanish spoken at home, but it was mostly amongst the adults, parents, grandparents, but not in the neighborhood and not at my school. So there were very few Latino families at all. So it was the language in the home. It was a secret language with the adults. And my sister and myself, we listened, we understood. She went on to study where I did not. But you grew up with that ear. But it wasn't really something spoken outside the home. Unless there were family members that came to visit. My grandmother had some old friends from Mexico that would sometimes visit Los Angeles, and they'd certainly come over, and you would hear the Spanish chatter going on, not really with us children. It was not encouraged. And definitely when I left the home, no Spanish was spoken. Oh, interestingly enough, I remember something now. It wasn't spoken except at school. They did bring in a television set, and we did, as we were older, maybe 5th grade, there was Spanish language lesson on the television. It was just a quirk. I guess it wasn't something continued. It was just, we're going to do these Spanish lessons once a week with a lady on the TV. And I understood, but it was very basic. But anyhow, other than that, there really wasn't a need in the community. There weren't recent arrivals at that time. And I'm talking about the late 60s, really. There weren't. There was not the emigration that happened later. So it was something at home. So I felt different. I thought, well, nobody out there speaks the way that we speak at home.
Well, you referred to it as the secret language. Mm-hmm. What do you think that means? Well,
the parents and grandparents could talk about adult business. That was not our business, for sure. So, not that there was anything wrong with it, but if they exclusively spoke in Spanish with each other, you kind of were tuned in a little bit. Oh, they're speaking in Spanish. And sometimes the tone would be a little more animated, so it must have been something interesting to them. So that in that sense, it was a secret language. But then going out in the community and you didn't hear it spoken out there, it's like, that's something different about us as a family.
When you realized it was something different about your family, do you remember the first time you felt that there was a difference?
Well, definitely when I entered school, there weren't people speaking Spanish, except for, like I told you, the television lesson that came in when I was already about 10 years old. But it didn't feel like a good difference because you felt like you couldn't relate to anyone else.
Was it just a matter of not acclimating and being, I think at a young age, we all want to be accepted.
Yes. Just that feeling isolated, feeling different. Like there was nobody that could relate in that respect. No one who had the language, they didn't share the culture. The food was not widespread. I mean, maybe there was 2 Mexican restaurants in town. And people would go. People would go to Mexican restaurants and they were lively and happy but you didn't see many people that worked in the restaurants out in the community. Let's just say that. So it wasn't that popular yet. So you didn't have the Mexican food wasn't out there. It wasn't in the markets. In fact, when we wanted real Mexican food, we had to go to markets elsewhere to get things like tortillas, pan dulce, menudo, things that we actually ate and were part of our regular diet that other people didn't. I didn't go into other people's homes really, but other people didn't talk about those types of food. So I didn't feel like it was a good difference. I wanted to be like everyone else. I wanted to be part of the mainstream. And television too. Television was very, there were no people that looked like us on television. I can tell you that. Nobody spoke Spanish on television. Except for, I remember when they started the, was it the UHF channels, Spanish language, Channel 34, and then the radio station. There was like one radio station, and it was actually in Pasadena. Radio 13, KW. And my grandmother would listen to that. She'd have that music on at home. And that music, I didn't hear it anywhere else either. So that's another thing that was exclusive to our home, that you heard the Spanish music on the radio. When they finally introduced Spanish language, which was not on standard channels, it was, Channel 34. You had to find that channel. I knew that was different. And that started happening maybe more so late 60s, I think. And it grew. It just grew from there. Now we have, Telemundo, Univision, all these networks. There were no networks. There were just a couple channels here and there.
I have a question here, and it comes from a past interview that we just did. There was a young man who we interviewed, and he talked about how when he spoke Spanish here in Prescott, it wasn't welcomed, and the teacher had to intervene and give him space to speak Spanish, and felt that it was okay. Do you ever remember any instances like that growing up?
Only once, when I was in about the 5th grade. There was a student that arrived from Mexico and was in our class. And I was amazed that our teacher knew how to speak some Spanish. And I heard her giving him some instructions of what to do. And then she asked me, is there anything you can help him with? So, on one hand, I felt kind of special in a good way that, teacher's asking me to help out. But I didn't have great Spanish either. And he really didn't seem interested in my help either. But it was okay. And I was really pleased that our teacher could reach out to him. And once again, I think he learned English quickly and, just blended in with everyone else. I kind of wonder, how did he grow up? How was his experience after that? But obviously he had been in school in Mexico, and I found that children who arrive a little bit older probably have been to school, and they do have skills. They do have skills in math, and they just don't have English. And that is the whole philosophy behind bilingual education, really, is you come with these skills. You have this language that you can transition, you can transfer into another language because you have a foundation of language. You have vocabulary, you have understanding. And that was the philosophy behind bilingual education, which is kind of faded now. Doesn't really exist. But it was rare. There were not many other children in my school, in my elementary school, that appeared to be Latino. But if they were, you didn't know it. They didn't. Maybe there might be a last name that sounded a little different, or their appearance. They would, just physically, but not a whole lot. And they definitely were enculturated. We all were English-speaking Americans.
Well, with that, I've got a question for you. I know one of the things that I know, even in my own experience, I remember an individual who was giving my mom a hard time because we didn't speak Spanish. And because for her, she felt that we needed to learn English first. And we learned a little bit of Spanish along the way, but not much. And it seems like there's critics if you don't teach your child English, given that it's the United States and that is the language of the country. But then parents can be given a hard time for not hanging on to that culture and passing that culture on to their children. What's your response to that?
Well, I think it's the times that we live in now, perhaps, that changed. Like from when I was growing up, there really wasn't a need to be bilingual unless you needed your language at home or went to visit family or relatives that were Spanish speaking. There wasn't the influx yet of immigration, but now it's like, okay, in many ways you might be encouraged to embrace your culture. Therefore, the language is part of it. I did have that experience as an adult, feeling ashamed of myself for not embracing the language, for not wanting to study it until I was an adult. And if a parent, in the past, if a parent did not encourage Spanish to be spoken at home, it was because they were afraid of discrimination. Maybe they had been discriminated against. Maybe they did their best to arrive in this country or adapt as quickly as possible. Like I'm trying to think of that little boy in fifth grade. I'm sure he had to learn quickly to be accepted by his peers, to fit in. So I think perhaps that's where that comes from, that fear of being discriminated against, where now there are enough people of Latin, whatever Latin heritage from many other countries. There are many other people here now. So it is something that should be encouraged. And also just for acceptance of oneself, for self-esteem, pride in one's culture, which I think I saw that change, let's say, definitely in the past 40 years, for sure. There's been a lot of immigration, not just from Mexico, from other Spanish-speaking countries, Latin America, South America, Central America, and we're all different. We may share the language for the most part, but there are many differences in those cultures, and wonderful. It's wonderful to see, but we're not all the same. So, but definitely I think it is something to be encouraged, and nobody should be given a hard time. And if they are, because they're probably reflecting on their own experiences.
Now, you also shared with me you had an opportunity after college and after you worked in the LA school district with children.
Yes.
You ended up in Australia for a while. And there you were an immigrant.
I was an immigrant. Yes, I was. And some of the advantages of coming from an English-speaking country were I was able to be evaluated as a teacher, and I could teach there without any issue. Also, people didn't know to discriminate towards Mexicans. That was something more interesting. Oh, we like Mexicans. We like Mexican food. We like the music. Embracing that part of that identity. But I had to go through many stages of being an immigrant. From to proving myself, I had to have something to offer. And as a teacher, and as a special education teacher, it's a necessary profession. So that part of it was not difficult, but I still had to go through the hoops to apply for. First, it was a work visa. Then it led to temporary residency, and then led to permanent residency, and then citizenship. But it took years. Lots of applications, and statutory declarations from people that, I was an upstanding citizen. And it took time. And it was worth it. But to understand, like, I could be asked to leave at any time. This is not my country. I was grateful to be there. But I always had to remember, where I came from. So I understand. I didn't struggle in that sense that if it didn't work out, it was an adventure for me. It was something I wanted to try. But I knew I could always come back. It's not like I was escaping oppression or any of the issues that face. I was not a refugee. I was there by choice. So that was different.
Well, one of the things I know you and I talked about was it seems like, especially in Europe and maybe to a certain extent in Australia, the idea of being bilingual, to walk down the street and hear multiple languages, it seems to be much more welcoming versus here in the United States. Any comments on that?
Yeah, well, it is interesting because, for example, in Europe, people do learn multiple languages. And you have your own native language, and then you master another one, maybe a few others. And as you travel through Europe, there's many different languages that are spoken, and it's fine. Where here in the United States, we don't. Maybe in high school, you take a couple of years of a language of your choice, but nobody masters anything. People don't even master English. But I think having lived overseas, you do hear a lot of different languages. I don't see a lot of people offended by hearing different languages, but you definitely, if it's an English-speaking country, you need to learn English for sure. But here, maybe it's something that's, I'm not going to say exclusive to Prescott, but I think you don't hear a lot of different languages here. Being so close to Mexico, you'd think, okay, well, we're multicultural. Not so much right here. Of course, you want to learn English, but it shouldn't be a question of if you speak anything else, there's something wrong.
One of the things that can happen when a child is raised in a bilingual home, especially if the parents aren't out there working in the community and they're a little bit slower to pick up the language than the child, they often find themselves translating for the parents. Have you witnessed much of that in this community?
Perhaps a little bit more Prescott Valley. I had the experience of translating in a school as well, but there weren't too many families that were exclusively Spanish-speaking, or they did have maybe a child, not necessarily a very young child. But I think that kind of puts the child in a very awkward position. I don't think they should have. It happens. It does happen, but not so much in this community. Maybe, definitely Los Angeles. There were definitely people that were there would be, the children would be the translators out in the community. You could spend practically your whole life in a community and not need to use English. But my stepmother came from Mexico. She was from Oaxaca, actually, and her first language was the Zapotec language. So when she moved to Mexico City, she had to learn Spanish. And then she emigrated here, probably in her 30s, met my father, and I never heard her speak a word of English, but she knew it. She knew English, but she wasn't out in the community so much to use it. But I'm proud of her. She got residency and she became a citizen. But I'm certain that she took her exam in Spanish. I think I'm glad that's something that's still allowed. I believe it is. But you can, depending on how much connection you have in the community, you can go for a long time without demonstrating mastery. That doesn't mean you don't have an understanding. But it is awkward, I think, sometimes, depending on what the topic is. Like if you were to be in a school and you had to translate for your parents and it was issues about yourself, I don't know. I think that would be really hard. So that's why I think it is good to have translators for meetings, for information, for conferences. But just like if everyday things like shopping, no, I think that's, I think that is that's a good thing. If a child helps their parents out to understand what's going on out in the community.
The work that you do here in Prescott and Prescott Valley, can you describe it a little bit?
Yeah, well, right now it's the beauty of being retired. I did retire after a number of years, but I still do stay connected in the community. I still do work in schools, just part-time, on a temporary basis. And I do seek out some of the same populations that I worked with before. So children with special needs, working with families. But it's once again, it's not really that diverse here. But I still, if I see an opportunity, if I see a family that is probably Spanish speaking, but I see the parents come into the school, and I will speak to them in Spanish. I will. And sometimes I get that look of surprise. But then I notice quite often they try to speak English. So I'm kind of letting them know it's okay. It's okay. Or I'll say a few words, especially the younger children, because some of the younger children that I see in the schools that I know they're Spanish speaking at home, they'll come out with both languages. And I like that. And I want them to feel comfortable and, to be proud of that language, to maintain that language. And I'll even ask, well, do you speak Spanish at home? Yes, at home. How about, but here at school, just to feel comfortable, because I can't imagine what it would be like to just enter a school and not know how to speak the predominant language there. But I think it is important to remain bilingual, if possible.
So in general, do you think the children in the area that are bilingual feel safe speaking Spanish?
I'm not sure. I'm not sure if they feel safe. Because I definitely think that if they feel that the majority, like most people are speaking English, that they've got to speak English. I don't know in terms of safety, how they feel.
Well, I mean safety in that you shared that even for yourself, you knew you weren't supposed to speak Spanish when you went to school.
Yes. Well, I think it's just different now. Like in terms of, there are many more Latinos here. I mean, in general, in the United States, in the Southwest, absolutely, than there were when I was growing up. So I think maybe in that sense, it's a little more common. I don't think they feel like they can't or they shouldn't, unless for some reason the message has been given to their families. We're in America, speak English. I don't know.
You went from, as a child, being reluctant to speaking Spanish at school, but yet you gravitated towards a career of working with bilingual special needs children.
Yes.
What was the turning point for you?
The turning point, oh my gosh. I think perhaps seeking out, like maybe my first teaching job, making sure that I worked in, it was like Southeast Los Angeles, where it was an industrial community, mostly Spanish speaking, and most of the parents didn't speak English, but they wanted their children to speak English and do well in school. And they definitely supported the language at home, the Spanish language, but when you're in school, you are speaking English. And that's all there is to it. They were very, very supportive. They were proud. They were proud of who they were, but they were grateful to be in the United States and never had any problems at all with those children. So I think, I made myself. I sought that out because I guess I had that turning point in my 20s and in college too, because I met a lot of Latin Americans in college. And they were the ones that we had all did well, and we were on scholarships. we were able to achieve a certain level where we were able to pay for education because we did very well. That was a reward. Okay, be who you are, be proud of who you are, don't hide it. Go out and make something of yourself. And I think my peer group, coming of age, early adulthood, definitely. It was then. And then after that, naturally, seeking out employment and wanting to work in the community. And I kind of learned what I missed out on maybe growing up because, it was within our family, but you didn't have a lot of the language and culture.
What would you say to viewers especially those here in Prescott and Prescott Valley. Is there anything in particular that they can do to make sure that bilingual individuals that they encounter, whether it's at work or in the grocery store, to make them feel more welcome?
To not be threatened, to not feel like, people are here to take over or take from. We have a lot to contribute. We're hardworking people, we're proud people, and just encourage people to celebrate their backgrounds openly, not as a secret. It's that. Yeah.
One more question for the children in this area that are bilingual. What's your vision for them?
That they grow up strong, believing in themselves, with high self-esteem, high standards, and to be proud, to make their families proud, to be proud themselves, to honor their heritage, because it's a beautiful language and culture. Even the differences, like the differences between Spanish-speaking countries, because definitely there are differences, but then we're still connected. We're still connected by the language and the heritage as well. It's be proud of who you are, where you came from. Don't forget where you came from.
You're getting me to tear up a bit. Thank you.
No, you're very welcome. Thank you.
That was a really interesting interview, Susan. Thank you so much for sharing it. I was particularly struck by the idea of a secret language. When I was growing up, my parents used to spell things when they didn't want me to understand. And after I learned how to read, they began speaking in the native languages of their parents. So my mother had grown up in a family where people spoke Yiddish, which is a kind of German dialect spoken by Eastern European Jews. And my father had grown up in a family where they spoke German. And so she would speak Yiddish, what she thought was, and my dad would speak what he thought was German. And it wasn't until I was a grown-up that I realized that if I tried to use those phrases with anyone else, nobody had any idea what they were. They had mangled those languages together. So it really did feel like a secret language.
Or maybe a really, really foreign language that no one else understood.
It was a little odd, yeah.
Well, I know for me, one of the things that Susan mentioned that really resonated is she was saying that as much as, and I agree with her, it's really important to hold on to that culture and cherish it. But when it comes to language, sometimes it can be challenging. And I know in the case of my parents, they were very fearful of sharing too much of the Spanish language with us. And it did come from my father being punished when he went to school for speaking Spanish. So a lot of times it's really hard for families, as much as they want to hang on to that language and share that part of their culture with the children. It can be challenging at times too.
And that makes a lot of sense. Thank you for sharing. So now we've come to the end and the part of our podcast we like to call Two Facts and an Act. So Susan, what are some facts you have to share with us today?
Well, interestingly, based on the U.S. Census, 78.4% of Americans only speak English at home. However, apparently we are the most diverse country in terms of languages, and according to the U.S. Census, 350 languages are spoken across this country.
That is a big Tower of Babel. That is a lot of languages.
It is. I was amazed by that number too. And I do have an ask, and it really does go back to just some of the comments that we continue to hear from all of our guests, and that is be kind, especially when you see someone struggling. They're trying to work on their English, and they may need a little bit of help. And so just be kind and see if you can be helpful.
I think that's an act that we can all get behind. Thank you, Susan. Also, remember, they probably speak at least one more language than you do. And you can find us and let us know about any feedback or questions you have at www.podcastcamina.com.
contradictions meet. Deserts of sand, mountains of snow. To make it our home, there's a long way to go.